The observation deck of the Perseverance was silent, except for the gentle hum of failing life support systems. Captain Marcus Webb stood motionless, his reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass, staring into an infinite expanse of black that stretched in every direction without mercy or hope. In his weathered hands, he held a data crystal containing the most devastating message humanity had ever received, the official exile order from the Galactic Council. His eyes traced the words again, though he'd already memorized them. Due to unauthorized intervention in the developmental trajectory of the civilization, humanity is hereby stripped of all privileges, holdings, and standing within the galactic collective. All human vessels are to vacate established territories within 60 days. Failure to comply will result in immediate military intervention. 60 days, that had been 8 months ago. Dr. Sarah Chen entered quietly, her face drawn and pale from spending the last 48 hours without sleep in the laboratory. She'd been monitoring the ship's deteriorating systems, calculating their odds, and the numbers painted a portrait of slow, inevitable death. "We've lost another thruster," she said flatly, dropping into the seat beside him. "The magnetic containment on fuel cell 3 is failing. We can limp along for maybe 3 more weeks before total systems collapse." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He'd known this was coming. They all had. The Perseverance wasn't designed for deep space survival without resupply. It was a diplomatic vessel built for comfort and communication, not for the desperate exodus of a species cast out by the galaxy itself. "The distress beacon?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Dead 17 times we've broadcast our coordinates. The colonies won't respond. The Mars settlement labeled us a liability. Even the Titan outpost, which we established ourselves, turned away our hails." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "We saved those people, Marcus. We analyzed their isotope mining operations, identified the cascade reaction they were inadvertently creating, and prevented a continental catastrophe. And for that, we're pariahs." It was true. 3 months ago, when the Council had detected human interference they'd invoked the ancient Prime Preservation Directive, a law older than human space travel itself. The directive was absolute. No advanced civilization could interfere with the natural development of pre-technological species, no matter the stakes. It was the foundation of galactic peace, they said. It maintained the natural order, they claimed. Saving a civilization from self-destruction was chaos, they'd decided. Never mind that without humanity's intervention, 15 billion sentient beings would have died in nuclear fire. Marcus finally turned from the window, and Sarah saw the steel in his eyes, not despair, but something harder, something more dangerous. "How many people are still awake in cryo?" he asked. Sarah blinked at the sudden change of subject. 237. The rest we had to keep under. We couldn't sustain them with current power levels. "And supplies. Real supplies, not recycled water and synthetic protein. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we start rationing to dangerous levels." She paused, understanding the current of his thoughts. "Marcus, you're not suggesting." "I'm suggesting we stop running," he said quietly, standing and walking back to the window. He pointed outward to a section of space that shouldn't have contained anything of interest. "The long-range scanners picked up something 6 hours ago. I was going to tell you, but I wanted to verify it first." Sarah moved closer. "What is it?" "A signal," Marcus said, and something almost like wonder entered his voice. "Ancient, deliberately crafted, coming from the uncharted sector beyond the rimward colonies. The sector that the Council hasn't mapped in 3 centuries because it's supposedly nothing but stellar instability and dead worlds." "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "Nothing could survive out there long enough to maintain a signal." "That's what I thought," Marcus agreed. "Which is why I ran the analysis 3 times, and each time the conclusion was the same. Whatever that signal is, it's been broadcasting for at least 10,000 years, maybe longer." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter of possibility, a spark of hope in the darkness. "You want to change course?" "I want to follow a beacon into the void instead of waiting here to die," Marcus said, and when he looked at her, his expression was that of a man who had already accepted the worst and found liberation in it. "The Council condemned us for trying to save life. Let's see what we can find when we stop running and start looking." The Perseverance altered course toward the unknown, and the void stretched before them like an invitation. The descent through the planet's upper atmosphere was more violent than Dr. James Liu had anticipated. The Perseverance shuddered and groaned as it pushed through layers of crimson clouds. sensors screaming warnings about radiation levels and atmospheric composition that shouldn't have been able to support any form of life. Yet below them, through breaks in the cloud cover, James could see them, the structures. The impossible, magnificent structures. "My God," he breathed, his hands trembling as he manipulated the scanner controls. "My God, look at this." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as the readings materialized on the holographic display. The planet itself was nearly twice Earth's size, with 3 sprawling continents visible beneath the perpetual cloud layer. But what captured their attention wasn't the landmass. It was the orbital infrastructure that ringed the entire world like a crown of artificial stars. Hundreds of platforms, thousands perhaps, arranged in geometric patterns so precise and intricate that James felt a moment of existential vertigo. No natural phenomenon could create such order. No young civilization could build on such a scale. This was the work of something ancient, something vast, something that had transcended the limitations of what James understood as possible. "The orbital velocity," James muttered, cross-checking the data frantically. "These aren't in decay orbit, they're being maintained. Some are showing active power signatures. How is that possible? How are they still functional after?" He paused, running calculations again, unwilling to believe what the numbers were telling him. "After tens of thousands of years." Captain Webb's voice crackled through the communication system from the bridge above. "Dr. Liu, what are you seeing?" "A Dyson swarm," James said, and the words felt surreal coming from his own mouth. "It's incomplete, degraded in places, but it's definitely a partial Dyson swarm. Someone built this to capture stellar energy on a planetary scale. The engineering required." He trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of what they were looking at. "Can you identify the builders?" Sarah asked, her scientific mind already working through the implications. James turned his attention downward toward the planet's surface. What he found there made his breath catch in his throat. "Biological readings," he said slowly. "Massive structures on the surface, geometric patterns, organized, intelligent, and Sarah, the life signs are active. Whatever civilization built those orbital platforms, they're still here. They're still alive." The scanner painted a clearer picture as the Perseverance descended further. The cities below weren't ruins. They were thriving, humming with energy, their crystalline structures catching and refracting the light of the red dwarf in ways that created cascading patterns visible from orbit. Roads connected massive structures. Transportation systems moved between them. Population centers spread across continents with deliberate spacing that suggested careful urban planning. "They've been maintaining this place," Sarah whispered. "For how long?" "The degradation patterns on the orbital platform suggest maintenance has been continuous for at least 3,000 years, James replied, scrolling through layers of data. "Possibly much longer. Whoever these people are, they've dedicated their entire civilization to preserving what was left behind." Marcus's voice came through again, tighter now with the weight of realization. "They're waiting for something or someone." It was James who understood first. He looked at the signal they'd been following, at the precise frequency and modulation that had drawn them across the void, and he understood. This wasn't a distress beacon. This was an invitation. "Captain," James said carefully, his voice barely steady, "I think we need to descend. I think we need to make contact, because whoever's down there," they knew someone would come. They've been waiting for someone to come, and they've been doing it for thousands of years. The Perseverance began its final approach, breaking through the cloud layer. Below them, the crystal cities gleamed in the light of the dying red sun, and James Liu felt the weight of discovery settle on his shoulders. The realization that humanity, cast out by the galaxy, had stumbled upon something that would change everything they understood about civilization, about destiny, about their place in the cosmos. The signal pulsed below them, patient and eternal, and the ship descended toward answers. The landing shuttle descended through layers of atmosphere that shimmered with colors Sarah Chen had never seen before. The crimson clouds parted like curtains, revealing a landscape that seemed to exist in defiance of natural law. Crystal spires pierced the sky, their surfaces catching light and transforming it into cascading rainbows. Pathways of some luminescent material connected massive structures that rose kilometers into the air, their architecture suggesting purposes that human minds were only beginning to grasp. Captain Marcus Webb sat rigid in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls despite the magnitude of what they were approaching. "Landing zone identified," he announced. Ancient guidance beacons are still active. They're directing us to a designated platform. Sarah watched the needle-thin spires grow larger, individual details resolving from the blur of distance into stark clarity. The civilization down here was vast, organized, still functioning. The energy signatures that had appeared on their sensors translated into visible light, soft glows emanating from buildings, illuminated pathways, the gentle hum of machines that had apparently never ceased their labor across millennia. Life signs, James confirmed from the science station, his voice filled with wonder and apprehension. They know we're here, movement from the nearest structure, multiple entities, there. They're approaching the landing zone deliberately. The shuttle touched down with barely a tremor, its stabilizers compensating for the difference in gravity. Sarah unbuckled her restraints with deliberate slowness, acutely aware that every movement, every breath, was a step into the unknown. Marcus checked the atmospheric readings one final time, breathable, though rich in elements that suggested a different evolutionary path than Earth's atmosphere. "Suits on," Marcus commanded. "Full protocols. We don't know what we're breathing, and we don't know what's down there beyond what the scanners tell us." They sealed themselves into environment suits, the material shimmering with protective fields. The ramp descended with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing the landing platform and the figures that awaited them beyond. Sarah's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The beings that approached moved with an unsettling grace, their forms graceful and impossibly tall. They possessed 4 muscular arms that moved with independent dexterity, each motion precise and deliberate. Their skin shifted between shades of sapphire and silver, as if responding to thought or emotion. But it was their eyes that captured Sarah's attention, multifaceted, prismatic, like looking into jeweled instruments designed to perceive reality in ways human eyes could never comprehend. The lead figure raised one of its upper arms, a gesture that the universal translator immediately recognized as peaceful. When it spoke, its voice emerged through their helmet speakers, transformed by the translation matrix into words, though Sarah could hear the harmonic undertones, a sound like wind chiming through crystal caverns. "Welcome," the figure said, and there was no hostility in the word, only a profound sense of recognition. "Welcome, travelers from the distant reaches. I am keeper of the archive of memory. We have waited 3,000 years for visitors. The beacon has finally called to someone worthy of answering." Sarah's throat went dry. 3,000 years. The implications cascaded through her mind like dominoes falling. "You knew we would come," she said, not as a question. "We hoped," the keeper replied, gesturing for them to follow. "Come, there is much to show you, much to explain. The knowledge you carry in your vessel, the knowledge written in your very genetics, it is precious beyond measure, and time is growing short. The cascade stirs in the deep places. We can feel it awakening. You must understand what you have found here before it is too late." As they walked toward the Crystal City, Sarah noticed something that sent ice through her veins. The keeper and its companions were extraordinarily graceful, moving with the confidence of a species at the absolute pinnacle of civilization. Yet they showed no weapons, no defensive postures. Instead, they displayed an almost desperate hope, as if they'd been waiting for salvation so long they'd almost forgotten what it looked like. "What is the cascade?" Marcus asked quietly. The keeper paused, its prismatic eyes reflecting the light of the red sun. "That is what we must teach you before nightfall, because if the cascade returns before you understand, before you are ready, then all that remains will be silence." The city embraced them, crystal spires rising like prayers around them, and Sarah felt the weight of ancient mystery settling across her shoulders like a mantle of purpose. They had come searching for survival. They had found something far more profound, a civilization waiting to pass the torch of knowledge to the only species in the galaxy that might be desperate enough to carry it. The descent into the archive began at ground level but quickly spiraled downward, the pathways descending through perfectly circular openings in the crystal floors. Sarah felt as though she were being swallowed by the planet itself, drawn deeper into secrets that had been buried for millennia. The walls around them pulsed with soft light, and as her eyes adjusted, she realized they weren't walls at all. They were data storage systems, vast quantum processors embedded in exotic matter, their surfaces flickering with information streams that contained the accumulated knowledge of civilizations lost to time. "How far down does this go?" James whispered, his voice filled with awe and creeping dread. 47 kilometers, Keeper of the Archive replied without hesitation. We built it to survive planetary catastrophe. The deeper chambers are shielded against radiation, temporal distortion, and the kinds of weapons that can unmake reality itself. Down here, knowledge persists. The temperature dropped as they descended, the air growing colder and somehow heavier, as if it carried the weight of ages. Sarah's suit compensated automatically, but she could still feel something, a pressure that wasn't physical but spiritual. The gravity of history pressing down on them from above and below. They entered the primary archive chamber, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was massive beyond comprehension. The chamber stretched in all directions, its ceiling lost in darkness despite the illumination. Holographic displays floated at various levels, some as large as buildings, others intimate and small. Data streams flowed between them like rivers of light. In the center of the chamber stood a control nexus where Keeper of the Archive moved with practiced grace, its 4 arms manipulating holographic interfaces simultaneously, each movement calling forth new displays of information. 20,000 years ago, Keeper began, manipulating a holographic image that showed a galaxy in brilliant detail. The architects ruled this region of space. They spanned thousands of star systems. Their technology was so advanced that they reshaped worlds, moved planets, bent the fundamental laws of physics to their will. They were in every meaningful sense gods. The hologram shifted, showing worlds being terraformed, stations being constructed on scales that made Sarah's mind reel. The architects had commanded power that made current human technology seem like children's toys. Then, Keeper continued, and something in its voice shifted, became mournful, heavy with the weight of tragedy. They discovered something in the deep places between stars, something they could not comprehend, something that hunted them. The hologram transformed into something nightmarish, a presence represented as darkness consuming light, as structure dissolving into chaos. Civilizations that had seemed invulnerable began to crumble. Orbital platforms went dark. Star systems fell silent. They called it the Cascade, Keeper said quietly. Not because it was a wave or a waterfall, but because each civilization it encountered triggered the next to fall, like dominoes in a cosmic game. It was not a weapon. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was a civilization unto itself, or perhaps something beyond civilization. Something that existed in the spaces between stars in the dark matter that fills the void. Sarah stepped closer to the holographic display, transfixed. What did it want? Why did it hunt them? Knowledge, Keeper replied, and the word hung in the air like a curse. It consumed knowledge. It infiltrated civilizations, studied their understanding of physics, engineering, biology, consciousness itself. And then it erased them, completely. Not out of malice, we believe, but out of a form of hunger that our minds can barely conceptualize. To the Cascade, advanced civilizations were not beings to be preserved or negotiated with. They were prey, sources of information to be extracted and consumed. The hologram showed the architect's response, and it was devastating. They began dismantling their own civilization, destroying technology, scattering populations, deliberately regressing themselves technologically, spreading themselves across hidden worlds, going silent in hopes that the Cascade would lose interest in a species that no longer exhibited the technological signatures it hunted. They chose extinction rather than enslavement, James breathed. They chose to become primitive rather than risk being consumed. Yes, Keeper confirmed. But before they vanished completely, before they surrendered their knowledge to silence, they left us. The Guardians. They engineered our species specifically to survive for geological timescales. They gave us the capacity to maintain the archive indefinitely. And they left us with instructions to preserve their knowledge, to await the day when a civilization might arise that had not been corrupted by Cascade interference, a civilization that developed in isolation. Keeper turned to face them fully, its prismatic eyes reflecting the data streams that surrounded them. A civilization that might be strong enough to do what the architects could not. A civilization willing to fight instead of hide. A civilization like yours. The implications crashed down on Sarah like an avalanche. The architects hadn't just been gods, they'd been victims. And now, across 20,000 years, they were asking humanity to finish what they'd started, to face the darkness they'd fled from. The weapon, Marcus said quietly. The archive has a weapon. Yes, Keeper confirmed, and it is both your greatest hope and your most terrible danger. Come, there is more you must see. Time is running out, and the Cascade grows restless in its slumber. Sarah emerged from the data immersion chamber after 72 hours of continuous study, her mind reeling from revelations that had fundamentally restructured her understanding of galactic history. The archive had presented its knowledge in waves, each layer more devastating than the last. She'd watched civilizations rise and fall. She'd studied the cascades' patterns of infiltration, consumption, and erasure. She'd seen the mathematical models the architects had developed, equations that predicted with horrifying accuracy how long any advanced civilization could survive once the cascades' attention turned toward them. The answer was consistently between 300 and 800 years. Her legs barely supported her as she walked through the corridors of the archive, the crystalline walls pulsing with gentle light that seemed almost mocking in its serenity. Somewhere in the depths of this structure was a weapon. Somewhere in the accumulated knowledge of a dead civilization was a tool designed to hunt the most dangerous entity the galaxy had ever known. She found Keeper of the Archive in one of the observation chambers, standing before a massive window that looked out over the crystal cities below. The red sun was setting, casting everything in shades of crimson and gold, and for a moment, Sarah could almost forget about the darkness waiting beyond the stars. "You've been consuming the historical records," Keeper said without turning around. It was not a question. 20,000 years of data, Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. 20,000 years of watching civilizations flower and die. 20,000 years of the cascade hunting across the galaxy, and we only caught glimpses of it. It's like trying to study a hurricane by watching raindrops. "Yes," Keeper said softly. "The architects documented what they could, but the cascade moves through dimensions of space-time that most civilizations cannot perceive. It exists partially in dark matter, partially in structures of reality that require mathematics most species never develop. What you have seen in the records is merely the echo of its true nature." Sarah moved to stand beside the Guardian, looking out at the cities that had been maintained for 3,000 years in anticipation of this moment. "How many civilizations has it consumed?" "In our records, 273, Keeper said. "In the records the architects possessed before their retreat. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, we cannot know. The cascade's reach extends beyond the regions of space that even the architects could map." The enormity of it crushed down on Sarah like a physical weight. Thousands of civilizations, billions upon billions of sentient beings, their knowledge, their art, their potential, all consumed and erased from existence. And the galaxy continued on, most species completely unaware of the danger lurking in the spaces between stars. "There's something else in the records," Keeper continued. "Something the architects discovered near the end of their civilization, a pattern, a weakness perhaps, or at least a vulnerability." Sarah turned to face the Guardian fully. "What kind of weakness?" "The cascade hunts civilizations that broadcast their technological signatures across space. Radio waves, energy emissions, the waste heat of advanced machinery. These are like beacons to it. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the brighter it shines to the cascade's perception. The architects believed that if a civilization could somehow remain hidden, if it could develop technology in isolation without broadcasting its advancement to the galaxy at large, it might escape the cascade's notice entirely. "Like humanity," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "We developed space travel in isolation. We didn't have access to any advanced technology that could have been influenced by the cascade. We invented our own physics, our own engineering principles." "Exactly," Keeper confirmed. "You are a blank slate to the cascade, unknown, unpredictable. Your very existence, your very way of thinking, is alien to everything the cascade has encountered in 20,000 years. That makes you extraordinarily dangerous to it, or extraordinarily vulnerable. We cannot know which until you understand what you truly are." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a sensation between terror and exhilaration. "The weapon? You mentioned a weapon the architects left behind." Keeper of the Archive's prismatic eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if those jeweled eyes could see not just her body, but her thoughts, her fears, her desperate hope. "Yes," the Guardian said. "It is called the Trace Engine. It is a device designed to force the cascade to reveal itself, to break whatever camouflage or stealth technology keeps it hidden in the dark matter between stars. But understand this, Dr. Chen, using it would be a declaration of war. Using it would announce your species' presence and intention to an enemy that has consumed thousands of civilizations. Using it would invite the cascade's full attention upon humanity." Sarah's mouth was dry. Why would we ever use such a thing? Because, Keeper said quietly, the architects left records suggesting that the cascade is beginning to wake. It sleeps in cycles, dormant for thousands of years at a time, but the signs are there. Increased activity in the dark matter, disturbances in regions of space that should be empty. The cascade may already be hunting again. Keeper moved closer, and Sarah saw something in the Guardian's expression that transcended species and language. It was desperation, hope, and terrible burden all compressed into a single moment. The architects believed that one day, a species would arise with the courage and the desperation to do what they could not, to hunt instead of hide, to face the darkness instead of fleeing from it. They believed that species would be the key to everything. "And you think that's humanity?" Sarah whispered. "I know it is," Keeper replied. "Because you are here. Because you were exiled by your own people for trying to save a civilization you'd never met. Because you have nothing left to lose. And because you are the only species in recorded galactic history that has developed technology completely independently, without any influence from the cascade whatsoever." Sarah looked back out at the crystal cities, at the orbital platforms that still maintained their vigil after thousands of years, and she understood. The weight of knowledge wasn't just information. It was responsibility. It was the burden of being the last hope of a dead civilization. It was the crushing realization that humanity's exile might not have been a curse. It might have been a preparation for the only task in the galaxy worth fighting for. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Keeper of the Archive turned to gaze once more at the sunset, at the red sun sinking below the horizon, and spoke words that would echo through human history. "Everything. We need everything you are, everything you can become, and the courage to use it against an enemy that has never known defeat." Briefing room aboard the Perseverance fell silent as Sarah finished her presentation. The holographic displays still showed the records from the archive, civilizations being systematically dismantled, the cascades' patterns of infiltration and consumption, the mathematical certainty of extinction that awaited any species that crossed its path. The crew stared at the imagery with expressions ranging from awe to absolute terror. Captain Marcus Webb was the first to speak, his voice steady but carrying the weight of command decisions that had no good options. "Let me summarize what you're telling us. There is an ancient enemy that has consumed thousands of civilizations across 20,000 years. It hunts advanced technology signatures. It cannot be fought with conventional weapons. And the architects, being so advanced they were essentially gods, chose to completely dismantle their own civilization rather than face it." "That's correct," Sarah confirmed, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "And now they want us, a species that was just exiled by the entire galactic community, that has no military advantage, no advanced weapons, nothing except basic space travel technology, to somehow face this threat." Dr. James Liu's voice rose in pitch, his scientific mind rebelling against the sheer impossibility of the proposition. "The architects believed that humanity's isolation from cascade influence gave us a unique advantage," Sarah explained carefully. "Our way of thinking, our approach to problem-solving, our understanding of physics, all of it developed independently. To the cascade, we would be incomprehensible, unpredictable. Or we'd be extinct within a generation," Engineer Thomas Reeves interjected sharply. "We've seen what this thing does. It consumes knowledge. It tears civilizations apart from within. What makes anyone think humanity could survive even a moment of its attention?" The argument erupted, the crew fragmenting into factions. Some advocated for taking the archive and fleeing to the farthest reaches of known space, hiding in obscurity and hoping the cascade never found them. Others insisted they had a moral obligation to warn the galaxy, despite the Council's rejection of humanity. A few, a very few, began to entertain the possibility that Sarah was suggesting, that humanity could become the hunters instead of the hunted. Marcus raised his hand for silence, and the room gradually quieted. "What does the trace engine actually do?" he asked Sarah directly. "It forces the cascade to reveal itself," Sarah said quietly. "According to the architect records, the cascade exists partially in dimensions of space-time that most civilizations can't perceive. The trace engine generates a quantum signature that essentially makes it impossible for the cascade to hide. Wherever it is, however far away, the engine would force it to become visible." "And when it becomes visible," Marcus pressed, "then we would know where it is. We could study it. We could potentially develop defenses. We could prepare humanity for what's coming because according to Keeper of the Archive, the cascade is already waking up. It's beginning to hunt again. James stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. This is insane. We're not warriors. We're scientists, explorers, refugees. The Council kicked us out because we saved a civilization. Now you want us to declare war on an entity that has never lost a battle in 20,000 years. No, Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice now. I want us to survive. The Council exiled us for doing the right thing. They made us pariahs for showing compassion, but they also made us invisible to the Cascade. They made us the only species in known space that developed independently. They made us the only people the Cascade cannot predict. She stood, facing the entire crew, her eyes burning with conviction. The Cascade hunts species that broadcast their advancement to the galaxy. The architects tried to hide from it by going silent. The Council tried to ignore it by maintaining their prime preservation directive. But we're the ones who were cast out. We're the ones with nothing to lose. We're the ones desperate enough to fight instead of run. Marcus watched her carefully, seeing the transformation that had taken place in Sarah over the past days in the archive. She'd walked down into that crystalline chamber as a refugee scientist. She was walking back out as something else entirely, a visionary perhaps, a warrior scholar armed with impossible knowledge. If we do this, Marcus said slowly, if we take the archive, if we take the trace engine, if we activate it, there's no going back. We would be declaring humanity's presence to the most dangerous entity in the galaxy. We're already declared, Sarah replied. The moment we sent that signal from Refuge 1, the moment we answered the beacon, the Cascade will know about us eventually. The only question is whether we know about it first. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The silence of people standing at a crossroads, understanding that every possible path led toward danger, but that some paths at least led toward purpose. One by one, the crew members began to stand. Not all of them. Some chose to remain behind, to return to Earth if they could, to warn the colonies of what was coming. But enough stepped forward. Enough raised their hands. Enough committed themselves to the impossible task. Marcus Webb looked at Sarah, then at his crew, then at the holographic displays showing the Cascade's ancient patterns of destruction. He thought about the Council that had cast them out. He thought about the civilizations that had fallen before. And he thought about the fact that sometimes the only way to survive the darkness was to walk into it with your eyes open. Then we prepare, he said quietly. We take the archive, we take the engine, and we take the fight to whatever waits for us in the deep void. The choice had been made. Humanity would stop running. The transformation of the Perseverance began at dawn and continued without pause through the next 6 months. The ship, designed as a diplomatic vessel with luxurious quarters and communication suites, was systematically gutted and reconstructed. Entire sections were converted into quantum storage chambers, their walls lined with exotic matter capable of holding the accumulated knowledge of 20,000 years. The observation decks became server rooms. The recreation facilities transformed into laboratories. Every square meter of available space was repurposed for a single, overwhelming mission: to carry the archive of the architects into the void and keep it safe from the Cascade's hunger. Sarah worked alongside the Guardians in the conversion process, and it was in those long hours of collaboration that she began to truly understand the beings who had maintained this vigil across 3 millennia. Keeper of the Archive moved through the human ship with surprising grace, its 4 arms simultaneously interfacing with multiple quantum processors, explaining to human technicians how to properly encode architect knowledge into formats that human systems could theoretically access. The danger, Keeper said one evening as Sarah and the Guardian stood in one of the newly constructed archive chambers, is not in the knowledge itself, but in how you access it. The architects designed these records to be understood gradually, in proper context. If you attempt to absorb too much too quickly, the patterns of information become contaminated. Your mind begins to see connections that aren't there. You start to make intuitive leaps that seem logical, but are actually leading you toward cascade failures in understanding. Sarah watched as Keeper demonstrated the proper way to interface with the quantum storage matrices. The Guardian's 4 hands moved with hypnotic precision, each touch releasing layers of information that built upon each other in carefully constructed hierarchies of comprehension. How many times have you personally accessed this knowledge? Sarah asked. Countless times across 3,000 years, Keeper replied. The maintenance of the archive is not merely physical, it is intellectual. We must regularly interface with the records, update the encoding, ensure that nothing degrades. But more importantly, we must understand the knowledge itself, so that when someone finally came to claim it, we could serve as guides. There was something almost mournful in Keeper's voice, and Sarah understood then what she'd only partially grasped before. The Guardians hadn't been waiting with hope. They'd been waiting with exhaustion. 3,000 years was an incomprehensibly long time to carry a burden, even for a species engineered to survive geological timescales. The trace engine occupied the heart of the ship's conversion. It was a device that defied easy categorization, part weapon, part sensor array, part quantum transmitter. The architects had constructed it from materials that didn't naturally occur anywhere in known space, substances that only existed through deliberate manipulation of fundamental physics. Installing it required reinforcing the Perseverance's entire structural integrity, with materials that Keeper of the Archive synthesized using equipment in the Archive's deepest chambers. James Liu spent weeks simply studying the engine, running simulations, trying to understand the theoretical framework that made it possible. His reports grew increasingly excited and increasingly terrified in equal measure. "The power requirements are astronomical," he told Sarah during one briefing. "When fully activated, the trace engine would draw enough energy to power a small star system. But more than that, the quantum signature it generates is specifically designed to propagate through dimensions of space-time that we can barely theoretically model. It doesn't just send a signal. It forces reality itself to acknowledge the cascade's existence, no matter how well hidden it is." "Can it be used safely?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Safely is a relative term," James replied. "Using it is safer than not using it in the sense that we'd at least know where the cascade is, but activating it would be like ringing a dinner bell for something that hunts civilizations. The cascade would know we exist. It would know we're a threat. It would turn its full attention toward humanity." As the months progressed, Sarah noticed a change in Keeper of the Archive. The Guardian moved more slowly, seemed to tire more easily, spent more time in contemplative silence. One evening, as they stood together in the chamber where the final archive data was being transferred, Sarah asked the question that had been building in her mind. "You're dying, aren't you? Not physically, but—" Sarah struggled for words. "Your purpose is ending." Keeper turned its prismatic eyes toward her, and in that gaze, Sarah saw something that transcended species. It was relief mixed with melancholy, the bittersweet emotion of finally being able to set down a burden that had grown too heavy to carry. "The architects designed us to last as long as the archive required protection," Keeper said quietly. "My people have served that purpose for 3,000 years. We have waited, maintained, preserved. Now the archive will live aboard your vessel. It will be carried across the void by a species more desperate, more determined, more willing to fight than my kind could ever be." "What will you do?" Sarah asked. "When we leave?" "We will finally rest," Keeper replied, and there was profound peace in those words. "We will tend the cities. We will study the remaining records. We will wait to hear if humanity succeeds. If you do, perhaps one day we will receive word across the void and we will know that our vigil was not in vain." The final transfer was completed on a night when the red sun hung low on the horizon. The Perseverance rose from the landing platform, its hull now reinforced with architect technology, its quantum stores brimming with 20,000 years of accumulated knowledge. As the ship broke orbit, Sarah stood at the observation deck and watched the crystal cities recede into the distance, saw Keeper of the Archive standing alone on the landing platform, its 4 arms raised in a gesture of farewell. Below them, the Eternal Guardians began their final rest. Above them, the void waited with all its secrets and all its dangers. The Perseverance jumped to FTL, and humanity's true journey, not as refugees, but as inheritors of a cosmic legacy, finally began. The Perseverance broke orbit at dawn, its engines screaming as they pushed the vessel beyond escape velocity. Sarah stood at the observation deck, watching the planet fall away with the same sensation one might feel watching childhood disappear into memory, a mixture of nostalgia, relief, and the weight of irreversible change. The crystal cities shrank to pinpricks of light, then vanished entirely as the ship climbed through the upper atmosphere and into the black. Keeper of the Archive remained on the landing platform, a solitary figure silhouetted against the red sun. Sarah watched until the planet itself became indistinguishable from the background starfield, until refuge one was nothing more than a forgotten world in an uncharted sector of space. 3,000 years of patient vigilance, and now it was over. The torch had been passed. Captain Marcus Webb entered the observation deck quietly, 2 cups of coffee in his weathered hands. He passed one to Sarah without speaking, understanding that some moments required silence rather than conversation. They stood together, watching the void stretch endlessly before them, a darkness so complete and so vast that it seemed to swallow meaning itself. "We've begun the message transmission," Marcus said finally. "All copies, distributed across multiple channels, using every encryption method we can manage. It'll take weeks for it to reach the inner colonies, months to reach Earth, but it's going out. The whole galaxy will know what we found." Sarah nodded slowly. The message had taken days to compose. They'd had to be careful, specific enough to inspire action, vague enough that the Cascade couldn't use the information against them, honest enough that humanity would understand the magnitude of what was coming. "We have discovered the reason for the galaxy's ignorance," the message began. "We have found the archive of the architects, and we understand now what hunts us all. Humanity has been chosen to carry this knowledge, not because we are the strongest, but because we are the only species in known space developed in isolation from Cascade influence. We are calling on all exiled human colonies, all independent settlements, all who will listen, prepare, learn, build. The darkness is waking, and when it does, we will be ready." "There's something else," James Liu said, appearing in the doorway with data crystals in his hands. His expression was grave. "I've been running analysis on the trace engine's projection models. If we activate it now with our current distance from known space, the signal would take approximately 6 months to propagate through dark matter channels and reach the Cascade's current estimated location." "How far away is it?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would be incomprehensible. "Roughly 2,000 light years," James replied. "In a direction that matches the original trajectory of the architect records. The Cascade appears to be moving through the galactic core, consuming knowledge from civilizations that orbit the supermassive black hole there." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So we have 6 months before it knows we exist. 6 months to prepare humanity to spread the archive's knowledge, to build whatever defenses we can manage." "Less than that, actually," James corrected grimly. "Once the signal reaches it, the Cascade will begin movement, travel time to human space. Conservatively, 2 to 3 years. Worst case, it could be here sooner. The architect's models weren't entirely reliable on this point. The Cascade's movement patterns don't follow conventional physics." The weight of that timeline settled over them like a shroud. 2 to 3 years. Humanity had been given a death sentence with an expiration date, but at least now they knew the deadline. At least now they could prepare. Sarah moved to the communication console and began composing a secondary message, this one directed specifically to the Perseverance's crew. Her fingers moved across the interface with determined precision. "To the people aboard this vessel and to all humans who will hear these words, we are no longer refugees. We are no longer outcasts seeking survival in the margins of galactic civilization. We are the carriers of knowledge that could reshape the fate of the universe itself. The galaxy cast us out, but perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps it was preparation. We have been given a task that no other species could accomplish, to face the darkness that has consumed thousands of civilizations across 20,000 years. We will not win easily. We may not win at all. But we will fight with everything we are, everything we can become, and the knowledge of all the civilizations that came before us." She paused, considering her next words carefully, understanding that they were being recorded, that they would be distributed across human colonies, that they might be the last message humanity heard before the Cascade arrived. "The architects tried to hide. The council tried to ignore the threat. We will do something different. We will hunt. We will learn. We will prepare. And when the Cascade arrives, it will find not a terrified species waiting to be consumed, but a civilization ready to fight for its existence with the courage born of absolute desperation and the knowledge born of absolute necessity." She transmitted the message across all available channels, watching it propagate through the ship's communication systems like light spreading through darkness. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "You know what comes next, don't you? We can't hide with this knowledge. We can't pretend we don't know what's coming. Every decision we make, every preparation we undertake will draw attention. The Council will ask questions. Other civilizations will become suspicious." "Then let them," Sarah replied, and there was steel in her voice now. The truth was always going to come out. At least this way we control the narrative. At least this way we're not waiting for the darkness to find us. We're walking toward it with our eyes open. The Perseverance made another jump, and the stars wheeled past them in hypnotic patterns. Sarah thought about the architects, about their choice to retreat into silence. She thought about the Guardians, about 3,000 years of patient waiting. She thought about humanity's exile, about being cast out by the galaxy, about the strange mercy of desperation. The void stretched endlessly before them, black and cold and infinite. Somewhere in that darkness, the cascade drifted through the spaces between stars, ancient and hungry and undefeated. But it had never encountered humanity. It had never faced a species that had nothing to lose and everything to gain from the fight. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the Perseverance, watching the universe wheel past, carrying within her vessel the accumulated knowledge of dead civilizations and the desperate hope of the living. Behind them, Refuge One began a new era of peaceful obscurity. Ahead of them, somewhere in the infinite black,